Our next panel is dealing with safety first, a unified strategy to emergency warming center compliance. Now, as we're talking about warming centers, I think it's important to talk about why, what it takes to make these centers safe, make these centers up to code, what a center even means, and this panel here, I think will give us some answers and be able to give some good insight. So, gentlemen, if you don't mind, please introduce yourselves and let us know who you are, what you do, who you represent, how long you've been doing it.
Okay, my name is Shane Clark, Deputy Fire Marshal for Caldwell County. I've been in fire service 20 years, been in code enforcement inspections for the past 5.
My name is Chris Jacobs. I'm the fire marshal with the city of Lenoir. I've been in the fire service for about 32 years with the city of Lenoir for probably 24, somewhere in that neighborhood. I'm also the emergency manager, and just want to say I pushed really hard to get this done, this type of thing done, because honestly the homeless is really important to all of us, and this group, I think, just wants to do it the right way.
Sure, absolutely.
I'm Jason Murphy with Caldwell County Building Inspection. I'm the director. Been building inspection approximately 8 years.
Okay, great. It has been mentioned that a warming station would be ideal for addressing some of the more immediate needs of the homeless, especially during the cold weather months. The word station is used more than shelter. We've heard center as well. Makes me think there's a difference between the two. What is the difference between a warming station, a warming center, and a shelter regarding codes and housing standards? Can you speak to the difference? And Shane, if you want to take it first, or you can. Okay, Chief.
Okay, I think a lot of it's terminology.
Sure.
Here in the South we use a word called y'all, and some people up north, out west, they don't really know what that word technically means. And I think it's the same with this. And so when we talk about warming stations or warming centers, when it comes to our code, that's not in there. So it's more of a local term. If you go to like Raleigh, or you go to maybe Gaston County, they have a term, warming station, and it means basically, so I've got a church, we've got some tables set up, we have some chairs set up, and people come in, they get warm, they're there for a short period of time, and then they leave. That would be what's there. Currently, Caldwell County, as I see it, does not have anything like that. So when it comes to code, I think all of us agree that we have to associate it with the closest thing in our code book. And what happens is that's like trying to cram that square peg into a round hole. And sometimes that makes it bad. It puts us sometimes head to head with the people that are good people trying to do good things. And so it changes, makes us maybe come out to be the bad guy sometimes. And I know the question asked about what the differences are. The two things in our code book that are there are shelters themselves, and then there's also a thing called a temporary emergency overflow shelter. All right, so a shelter itself, we don't look at things through the eyes of homeless specifically. If you could imagine a tornado comes through here and puts a whole community, now they're all homeless. And so our objective at that point is open up a shelter so that any one of us may wind up in that situation. And so we have to come up with a place to put them. And a shelter itself has specific requirements. And I think that's one of your questions later. So when it comes to the temporary overflow shelter, you're more looking at, so my shelter is now full. Let's say my shelter has room for 20 people. All right, so once we get to 21, now what are we going to do? Now it's when we overflow into temporary overflow shelters, which would be like churches, community centers, things like that. Again, it has a whole separate set of rules.
Yeah, that's good. Jason, you have
I agree with what Chris said. The term warming and or cooling, for that matter, station is not identified in the code, the building code. The temporary overflow is, however, for the reasons that Chris just laid out. So you can take a area in a building, in a business, in a church, in virtually anything, and call it a warming station, it's still whatever that room originally was designated as. You're just using it for a different purpose at the time. And I agree with Chris, that is for someone to come in, stay for an amount of time and leave, and there's no overnight stays. There's where you're turning, that's where the term shelter comes from, because you're staying overnight.
Right. Shane, you have anything to add? Yeah, I know that's more in their rule. Jason, we'll stick with you. We'll stay with you. What are some specific fire safety regulations and building codes that need to be considered when setting up a shelter, or what specific codes?
Well, that's a little more difficult to answer. There's, again, shelters, and there's temporary overflow shelters. What I think what we're talking about is the temporary side of things. So yes, there's certain things that are required, what has to be there, and the occupant load, the space it's intended for. The biggest thing is how do you keep it warm? And portable heaters are prohibited. You have to have a mechanical system for whatever space you're designating to keep this place comfortable. And
Explain why are portable heaters prohibited?
For the hazard involved. You're introducing more of something into a space that was not intended for that, whether that be by electricity or a fuel fired appliance. You're increasing the hazard for creating a fire or for other hazards that's associated with that.
Right. I know carbon monoxide is also just a huge thing.
Well, if you do a fuel fired appliance, then is the space you got equipped with carbon monoxide detectors, which, if not, they're absolutely not allowed, but the space heaters are not allowed in the temporary shelter.
Right. Gotcha. Chief.
So, and forgive me, I'll have to read some of this. So when it comes to shelters, when we look at a building, we basically assign it an occupancy, and most of the time Jason does that to set a standard. And basically what we're talking about in this case with shelters is a R1, which means it's residential, or R2, I'm sorry, R1. Yeah. So basically what we're talking about though is, so for a shelter we're looking at must have approved fire safety and evacuation plan with diagrams on the wall for them, and also a staff has to have instructions for emergencies. So if there's a fire there, they have to have something, since this is what you're supposed to do. There's a heart attack, we all know to call 911, but in that emergency, sometimes we get caught up in the moment. Some other things, they have to do fire drills and staff and training. They have to have a sprinkler system in place inside the building. Fire extinguishers appropriately placed inside the structure, and fire alarms are normally required with smoke detection. And then, like Jason said, you're going to have some kind of CO detection. Also, for like your temporary shelter, so remember we had that shelter, it's now overflowed into our temporaries, so this would be where the churches would fit in, or maybe a community center or something like that. Honestly, they can't have any more than 20 individuals, and they can't have anybody under the age of 18 unless that site is specifically set for that. Some of the things we deal with when we look at this is, and I know law enforcement deals with this, let's say that I have a pedophile.
Yep.
And that person, now we're putting them in here with this shelter with somebody who's underage, and that may violate their stuff, and next thing you know, law enforcement involved, they're going to jail and all that good stuff. But the thing that we got to look at is I can have multiple temporary overflow shelters. So this one would be for our young people. This one might be for those people that need a separate place from them. So that way it's always covered. Some other things that we're looking for, it has to be built of a certain construction type. And that means type 1, 2, or 3. Do you want to take a shot at trying to explain what that is?
Construction type is all talking about how flammable the building is.
Okay.
Type 1 construction is the least flammable, so it's basically steel and concrete.
Okay.
A top 3, still have some steel and concrete, but maybe you have some heavy timber construction that it takes a long time to burn through. You get to a top 5 occupant or construction type, and that's basically your residential homes, your older stick frame churches, things of that nature. So in a temporary overflow shelter, 1, the construction type is important. 2, that is limited to A2 or A3 occupancy as well. So those are basically, well, I'm going to read the list. Not limited to, though, but banquet halls, casinos, nightclubs, restaurants, and taverns and bars. That's an A2 occupant. A3 is amusement parks, art galleries, bowling alleys, basically big places people gather, and that's where your religious organizations come in. So that's what qualifies to be able to be used as a temporary overflow shelter.
Oh, interesting.
Also, we have to have at least 2 people there to supervise. One of them has to be awake at all times to supervise what's going on, and they have to be at least 21 years of age. Smoke detection, fire alarm, we talked a little bit about that, but it has to be in the sleeping rooms, the access corridors, and the stairwells going around the building. Minimum of 2 egress points, so they got to have 2 ways out of the building. They have to have emergency lights. They don't have to have the sprinkler system at that point. So your shelter will have to be sprinkled, but as we overflow into emergency temporary, you don't have to have that sprinkler system in there. Heating and cooling must be provided, and like Jason said, no space heaters. And then we have to have some fire extinguishers. Can't do any smoking. That's out. Must have occupancy permit, so to have this, both the shelter and the temporary shelter has to be by permit. And so that doesn't mean that every year somebody has to come out and write you a permit, but we would come out and do an inspection on the site to make sure it meets all this criteria. It can't be open any more than 150 days out of the year, out of a 365 period. So we have to watch that and be careful with it. And then it does have to meet ADA. So.
I'm sorry, what was that last one you said?
ADA.
Accessibility.
ADA.
Accessibility for handicap.
ADA accessible.
There, on temporary overflow shelter, there are some exceptions as far as the age. I want to speak to that. It says that no one under the age of 18, but some of the exceptions say it can be opened up for families with minor children. So just one thing, but your staff has to be at least 21 years old and a minimum of 2.
Right. Shane, is there anything you want to add?
No, they're covering it pretty much word for word.
Good. I mean, having you here for moral support is good. I mean, that's really good.
Shane, you take the next question.
Next question has to do with zoning regulations. So are there any particular zoning regulations or permits required for operating a shelter, which you sort of touched on this, warming station, specific locations, such as a church or community center? If so, what are the requirements for emergency exit lighting? You sort of touched on this. Are there any restrictions on the types of heating equipment? You've touched on that as well. Is there anything we need to add to that about particular zoning regulations or permits? I mean, you pretty much touched that. That was the next sort of.
As far as the permits go for, a temporary overflow or temporary shelter, if you will, an A2 and an A3 occupant load or assembly area is already going to have all that in place. They don't need a special permit to do that, to open the doors, to let people in for a short amount of time or a few days or whatever the case may be. And the occupant load that's already posted by the church or the place of assembly is already there. It's required to be there. So they really don't have to do anything else. Where we come in is if something is introduced that shouldn't be there, that's when we start getting in the weeds.
And the permit would just, provide information to us that we have the shelter open. Right. So we're not blindsided.
So you know what's going on, how many people are there, so you guys, if you need to provide services, then you can be able to do that. Okay. This is the last question, and it's sort of in the same vein. Are there measures that need to be in place to address potential hazards? You talked about smoke and flammable materials already. You guys really have covered a lot of this. How can compliance be ensured with occupancy limits, spacing requirements, and then really, I think this is where maybe we haven't touched on. Are there any training or certification requirements for staff or volunteer that would be working in warming stations or these temporary shelters that you guys were talking about with that? So you guys have really touched base on a lot.
You speak more to the training.
Yeah.
All right, so as far as training, and I had a discussion with the DSS about, how does that work? All right, because most of the time what happens on my end as an emergency manager is we have an incident, some kind of natural disaster, and I say, hey, we need a shelter. So we're going to designate this shelter. We've already got it set. This is the one we want. Then we call DSS and say, hey, who's going to staff this? They normally are going to bring some people over. They're going to run that thing, or it may be volunteers. But either of those groups have to go through special training to run that facility. There's things that you want to do. There's things that you don't want to do. FEMA does provide information and training classes on that. As far as the responsibility at that site, it does go back to whoever's running that particular shelter, overflow, however it's going to be. That person that's running that literally is running that. So, does the fire marshal's office or the building inspector just come knock on your door? It's possible. It's more possible if I get a complaint that says, hey, they're doing this over here, and it happens. You have to understand when somebody files a complaint, it's not just always they're trying to be bad. Maybe they think something's wrong. I saw PD up here a minute ago talking about, everything that people call in about is not necessarily illegal. We ran into that last year where, we sort of had to take the best part of the situation and make it work, okay? Because on my end and Jason's end, on Shane's end and their group, if I shut your shelter down, that means that I'm putting people out into the cold, and that person dies. I have to live with that. But people also have to understand that if you're running a shelter and you're doing something wrong and it still kills that person, I have to live with that too. So it's important to make sure that we are doing our very best to make sure that it's done correctly.
Yeah, and I think it's important for everybody to know that you're not out to get people. These rules are to save people and to keep people safe. Because if there is a fire in one of these, the emergency services people are going to have to go in there, and you're putting the fire department at risk. You're putting the police and any of the paramedics that need to be, or EMS services. Ultimately, this is about saving lives. And I know it's tricky because the people that are going into these centers, they're also you're always kind of caught in a tough spot to be in what you guys do.
We're not here to make it hard on anybody or try to make it difficult so we don't have to deal with you.
Yeah.
We're just like you said, we're all about safety. We want to keep people safe.
Yeah, and I think ultimately that's what it's all about. Shane, is there anything you'd like?
Yeah, just the biggest thing would be, communicate with us, reach out to us.
Yeah.
Like Dave said, we're not, coming to shut you down. We're more than happy probably jump in and help. But you have to communicate.
Yeah. I think that this is our third panel for the night. I think all three panels are saying, hey, call us, reach out, tell us what you're doing, ask us questions. If you want to do this and want to do it right, we're here to help you and guide you along the way. So I think you guys are no different
Absolutely.
on that space. Gentlemen, thank you again for giving the time and your insight. This is important. I think a lot of people don't think about what it's like to be in your shoes, and I think they need to understand what it is that you guys are looking for if this is something that they want to get into or to try to understand and be a part of. So again, I appreciate each and every one of your opinion. Thank you for watching.